Coming up, deck the halls for the Christmas election. We prepare for 6 weeks of Yuletide political madness, our Santa sack brimming with seasonal voting-based joy, though thankfully no more Christmas-related metaphors. Hello, Paul Osborne here. Thank you for downloading the first podcast proper of the 2019 general election. Yes, we've all had that terrible experience of the unwanted Christmas present, and here it is on a ridiculous scale. As the Royal Mint melts down all those commemorative Brexit 50-pence pieces, and a bean counter in the Treasury tries to work out exactly how much money was wasted on no-deal planning and that ludicrous get-ready-for-Brexit advertising campaign, now our politicians have come for our Christmas parties, because they hate us, and they want us to be unhappy. And as if we haven't suffered enough already this week, then Donald Trump wades in, calling into Nigel Farage's LBC show urging Boris Johnson to form an alliance with the Brexit Party leader. Then, as if by magic the following morning, Farage threatens to run candidates in every Tory seat unless Johnson follows the president's friendly advice. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get straight into it and bring in Robert Meakin. We'll start, Robert, with the first December election in nearly a century. There's a good reason why the last time we did this in December was in 1923. Nobody wants to do it. The problem is that by this point an election had become inevitable, and the 12th of December was probably about the first available date. You know, the last roadblock in all this was Labour refusing, when we had another vote under fixed-term Parliament laws at the start of the week. Labour refused to support it. Then miraculously their objections disappeared when the one-line bill came back the following day. I mean, I understand that, because you can't keep saying you're desperate for an election and then keep voting against an election every time it's offered. So despite the misgivings that I know a lot of people in the Labour Party have, they had run out of road to object.
Yeah, indeed. The current makeup of Parliament had clearly just run its course, because we'd obviously hit this wall. Some would argue we'd hit this wall long ago. But it was clear that something had to give. I know there were people who obviously very desperately wanted that to take the form of a second referendum, but it's in the end the general election scenario was an inevitable one, because Parliament really couldn't function any further in terms of taking things forward. Obviously, Labour have understandable reservations about an election. Team Boris are perhaps overly cocky about the prospects of a general election. So you had sort of contrasting agendas there. But in the end, the system just had to give out and allow this to happen.
Because it's such a long time since a December election, we don't have any evidence to back up all these hunches that we have about a Christmas election. You know, we've got a hunch that the turnout will be lower. We've got a hunch that students may vote in smaller numbers because it coincides with the end of university terms. We've got a hunch that the elderly might stay away because the election's being staged at a time of year when it's dark by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, what we do know, I think, with absolute certainty, is that outside of oddballs like you and me, nobody wants, A, the third general election in just over 4 years, and B, to be dragged into one, 12, 13 days before Christmas.
The public at large are quite rightly sick and tired of this political drama, this now particularly bad political drama that we've all endured for months and indeed years. So yes, the last thing that a lot of people really want to be doing during the festive season is taking part in a general election. Although we shouldn't underestimate, as the momentum begins to gather, as the inevitable hysterical high drama gets into full flow, maybe the country will become more engaged in it, because as tiresome as the sight of our politicians is presently, I think when it does come to general elections, all manner of stories and subplots can unfold. Traditionally, they are not dull affairs. And so, yes, while people are sick and tired of it, yes, people are groaning loudly at the moment that they don't want another general election. As we get closer to the big day itself, I suspect we're not going to be lacking in public interest.
You think about the lousy reception that carol singers get on the doorstep. I mean, imagine, a knock at the door on the 10th of December. Oh, that's those kids from next door singing Ding Dong Merrily on High. Oh, no. Hello, it's your local Labour/Conservative/Liberal Democrat. Can I count on your support? The door is slammed shut in their face. There are some logistical questions as well around all this. At the start of the week, the EU confirmed the new extension. So the Brexit deadline is now the 31st of January, though we could leave sooner if a withdrawal agreement was passed sooner. That seems very unlikely, though, because if the election's on the 12th of December, when is the House of Commons going to return? Are we seriously suggesting we're going to drag the poor old Queen out to do another Queen's speech before Christmas? I mean, she's usually a bit busy, popping off to Sandringham at Christmas. We've got to swear in all the MPs. We've got to have a Queen's speech debate. All those things that we only went through, earlier this month. We have to do it all again. And when is Parliament actually going to be able to sit down and start talking about Brexit? Because it feels like 2/3 of the 3-month extension is now lost because of staging this election, and MPs will probably only be able to start thinking about Brexit again in the 1st/2nd week of January.
We've reached a state of affairs where both the main sides, I talk about the main side in terms of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, that both sides think that by winning this general election, they will therefore then get their way in some form as regards Brexit. So you're right. It's almost, I think people are rather overlooking the tight timescale before us, because I think there's so much at stake in terms of the general election. Both sides believing that if they can get over the line at this general election, they will win the Brexit argument. I think it almost gets forgotten that it's only, just as you say, a matter of weeks before that next theoretically all-important deadline. If you're on Team Boris's side at the moment, you'll be thinking, we've almost got there. We've just been frustrated by the machinery of Parliament, frustrated by a Labour front bench and our other political enemies. We've got the man who can win this election. With these numbers, we can then push through this deal once and for all. That's what they're banking on. But as you say, after the election, there isn't that much time to actually do the nuts and bolts dealings.
The only way I can see Brexit being resolved by the end of January is if that election results in the Conservatives winning a majority big enough to be able to get their deal through. Any other outcome, a hung parliament, Tory majority of 10, Labour winning the election, some sort of coalition of some description, any of those outcomes, and the first thing you're going to have to do is go to the EU and ask for another extension.
Yes, and let's be honest, I mean, the EU are understandably hedging their bets regarding this, although they've given the extension till the end of January. I don't think they would be appalled by a scenario where a pro-Remain alliance of some form comes out of this general election and wants to take a few steps back. So it suits the EU to sit tight. I mean, while at the moment they've been partly resigned to dealing with Boris and agreeing to some sort of deal, they also know there's a reasonable chance there could be a very different and, dare I say, more agreeable scenario to them by the end of the year.
Well, we will get on to the parties and their likely platforms in a moment. But first, we need to talk about the number of MPs who have decided that they've had enough. Now, look, at every election, we say goodbye to dozens of MPs who decide for a variety of reasons not to stand. And this election is no different, except that it is different because for every veteran, Kenneth Clarke or Oliver Letwin, departing for a well-earned retirement, there are younger MPs, many of them women, who are deciding to walk away from political careers that ought to have continued for many years, in some cases decades. It seems to me, Robert, there are two things going on here. There is definitely some sort of purge going on, whether official or just self-imposed, of Remain-leaning Conservatives who just sense that the tide has moved against them in the party, people like Amber Rudd, for example, who are just choosing to walk away. But then the mass departure of MPs who have had enough of being abused and harassed and threatened. Now, some people have tried to play this down this week and said, look, twice as many men as women are stepping down at this election. Well, yes, but there are twice as many men as women in the House of Commons anyway. And what I think is interesting and relevant is the average ages of the men and women who are stepping down. The men are predominantly in their 60s and 70s. There are people like David Liddington who's saying he's going because he wants to spend some time with his family while he's still got years of good health and active life ahead of him. A lot of the women are in their 40s and 50s. They're in some cases people who were only elected back in 2015 who are deciding to leave and to pursue another career. And in some cases, they are directly quoting the abuse, the harassment, the intimidation that they have suffered as the reason that they are cutting short their careers in politics.
We know this has been the most poisonous political time, certainly in our lifetime, the most divisive and polarised. And you can understand why some people, very much in their prime of their lives and their careers, say, no, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to put up with it any longer. For all the cynicism that's attached to members of Parliament, sometimes deservedly, often not, you have to remember, a lot of these people could have far easier, far more lucrative lives away from politics. And some people are now choosing to head in that precise direction. I think it's very worrying as a broader trend here when such people disappear. In an ideal world, Parliament would attract people from all walks of life, all manner of talents, whether it be from the worlds of business, law, science, engineering, teaching, health service. You want a rich tapestry of all these sort of people coming in with all their various experience and talents. And my fear is more and more that what you're getting, but when these sort of people disappear, is that there seems to be a trend that you're getting sort of very much sort of tribal, party, political, local political figures coming in and getting these seats. And frankly, I'm not convinced they're the calibre often that we want in terms of parliamentary representatives. I think we're being diminished slowly in terms of the calibre of our politicians. And I think that when you see the likes of Amber Rudd and people like that disappearing, I just think whatever your party political persuasion is, there is an able, thoughtful politician who we've lost. I think the calibre overall of parliamentarians is on the downturn.
Of course, one side effect is that the cohort of Tories who will be sitting behind Boris Johnson, whichever side of the House of Commons he finds himself after the 12th of December, will be more in keeping with his views on Brexit, which means that should the Conservatives be back in government after this election, he should have a much easier task of getting his Brexit legislation, getting his deal through the Commons. It's clear already from the adverts that have popped up on social media, Robert, that Boris Johnson is going to be the overwhelming focus of the Tory campaign, that the others at the top of the party and the cabinet are barely going to get a look in. Now, that sounds a lot like the strategy that they built around Theresa May 2 years ago with, shall we say, mixed results. This time, I suspect they think they have somebody who can actually carry off the starring role.
Boris is a far superior campaigner to Theresa May. She was famously dismal in 2017. It highlighted all her weaknesses, really just came under the spotlight, and we know how that played out. Of course, the Tory party are banking on brand Boris really hitting home across the country, sort of reaching into areas they may not have hoped to reach into when Theresa was the leader. But we know, to put it politely, that Boris is a very divisive figure. He brings out far more extreme emotions than Theresa ever did. I mean, there are plenty of people who adore him, think he's great, love the Jack the Lad type character, and there are just as many people who absolutely despise him. So it's an understandable gamble the Tory party are making. They are right to have Boris, as the symbol of the whole thing. That's probably their best route to success, but it does come with its risks. And as of now, it'd be very, very brave, stroke foolhardy to start shouting and predicting how this is going to play out. The Conservatives inevitably feel that Boris is their best route to success, but it is by no means guaranteed. It's so difficult to call this election.
It's probably the Margaret Thatcher-Neil Kinnock election of 1987's the last time you had an election when the leaders of those two main parties were as loved by some as they were loathed by others. The personalities are so polarizing in a way that they haven't been for such a long time. Someone sent me the latest opinion poll and said, look, here you are, it's all over. Tories are on 41, Labour are on 24. And I just replied and said, hang on a minute. At the start of the 2017 campaign, the Tories were on 48% and Labour were on 24. And look where that ended up. And there are people in the Tory party who say that this is actually not the walk in the park that some people seem to think it is. So, for example, the Tories are pretty reconciled to losing about 10 seats in Scotland. They don't have Ruth Davidson helping them out now. Now that knocks them back 10. They need to gain 30 to get over the line, to get a majority. They need to gain seats to be in a comfortable position. Where are those gains coming from? They could lose a couple of seats in London as well, and their only route that I can see to getting a majority takes them through the North and the Midlands and into constituencies that have been rock solid loyal to Labour but are also leave voting. And it's whether that loyalty to leaving the EU is bigger than the past loyalty to the Labour Party, and whether those Labour leavers in the North and the Midlands can stomach voting for Boris Johnson.
Tory HQ is banking on Boris's experience in London, where he was able to cut through to Labour voters, obviously with great success. And they're hoping he can repeat the trick nationwide now.
A very, very different Boris Johnson.
And a very different Boris Johnson, the way he was perceived then as well, rather than the rather more controversial, less lovable Boris Johnson of recent years. So can he really kick down the door in those Northern and Midlands constituencies? It'll be a remarkable achievement if he can. I find it hard to believe he's going to have the sort of success that some have been predicting presently. Then you think, well, what else could he rely on? Is he going to rely on a resurgence of Liberal Democrats taking certain Labour seats? Well, if the Lib Dems have a decent night, they could cause the Tories all manner of headaches as well. And then, of course, you've got the Brexit Party angle as well. We don't know how that's going to play out. So Boris has plenty to worry about. It's certainly, I don't think he can take much for granted presently. He's desperately wanted this general election for a long time. He believes that's his way out of this crisis. He believes he can get the numbers, but it's still a high-risk strategy as we sit here now.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's already launched Labour's campaign, saying he wants to transform the UK. It was a powerful speech. It was a reminder that what Jeremy Corbyn is best at is not the House of Commons, is not the detailed forensic interview, is the rabble-rousing, is the standing up in a room full of people who are disposed to agree with him and ranting about how awful the government is and what a terrible state the country is in and how Labour is going to change that. It was all about that line about, the many versus the few. Whose side are you on? And singling out people like Rupert Murdoch and Mike Ashley as examples of crony capitalism, to use Ed Miliband's old phrase. And you can see that working with Labour supporters, and as few mentions of Brexit as possible, because already every time you ask a Labour candidate about Brexit, they go, I'm not being asked about Brexit on the doorstep. People on the doorstep aren't talking to me about Brexit. They're talking about the long wait for hospital appointments. They're talking about their kids' school not having the necessary equipment. They're talking about the state of the economy and the empty high street. They do not want to talk about Brexit because their policy going into this election will be the fence-sitting policy that they've had for such a long time.
Labour HQ are going to be banking, as you say, Brexit being pushed rather to one side, they hope, if that's at all possible, that they can get back to their core vote, that they can appeal to their loyalty, that they can appeal to their natural loathing of posh old Etonians like Boris Johnson. They're going to be giving us that in spades. Yeah, this old Etonian who doesn't care about you, who wants to sell your NHS. We're going to be hearing that again and again and again. Now, Team Corbyn are banking on that overriding his dismal performance during the Brexit debate. That people fall back into line because the likes of Boris Johnson and his aides represent everything so many of their natural supporters loathe. So he's going to hope to channel that, to whip that up over these coming weeks. And who's to underestimate him at this stage? He had yes, he lost the last general election, but had a far more impressive campaign than anybody imagined. Can he repeat the trick twice? I wonder.
It's tricky because the things that surprised us in 2017, the radical left-leaning manifesto, the nationalisation, the massive public investment program, all of those things, that's not new because we had that in 2017. And also that idea of voters being surprised to see Jeremy Corbyn as an effective campaigner, that's not new either because that happened in 2017 too. Of course, normal people who are not like you and me do not spend every moment thinking about Jeremy Corbyn's performances, and there is capacity for them to be surprised in that way. Those messages about the NHS, that, our NHS is not for sale stuff, will play very well with the, let's remember, 40% of voters who backed Labour last time. Yes, the polls have them on 24 now, and they've probably lost a chunk of them to the Liberal Democrats, but you'd assume that poll lead will narrow as the campaign goes on. But what will be critical and what's different this time to last time is that the Liberal Democrats are really sort of snapping at their heels this time. Those polls only put the Lib Dems 2-3 points behind Labour, and they have taken this straightforwardly anti-Brexit, we will revoke Article 50 position. If you want to stop Brexit, vote Lib Dem. That will appeal to people perhaps in some parts of the country, particularly, say, in London, who had voted Labour in the past. Labour did phenomenally well in London last time, not just in terms of picking up seats, but in terms of the gigantic majorities that they were racking up in parts of London. Now, if the Lib Dems surge in those places, if they take votes from Labour in seats where maybe the Lib Dems don't actually have a real chance of winning, you could be talking about the Liberal Democrats helping the Tories inadvertently by splitting the pro-Remain anti-Tory vote and allowing the Tories to sneak through the middle. That might be Boris Johnson's other route to getting a majority. But I was speaking to somebody a couple of hours ago who said, look, I just don't think the age of tactical voting applies anymore. That given that we haven't had a clear majority from a general election for the last 14 years, you just have to decide which of these parties you are closest to and vote for them.
The Labour Party will be shouting every other minute that if you vote for the Lib Dems, you're voting with a bunch of Tory collaborators. You can hear it now. They're the people who opened the 10 Downing Street door to let Boris back in. Of course, that's the narrative they're going to adopt because the Lib Dems are a real danger to them this time. I mean, if the Lib Dems can't have a decent general election this December, when can they? Credit to them. I think they've played it pretty well tactically, you'd think, in theory at least, because there's clear water between them and the Labour Party, clear water obviously between them and the Tory Party as regards Brexit. There's been clarity and consistency to their position. And yes, they were rewarded for that when it came to recent other elections, but when it comes to the actual general election, it's whether the Lib Dems can really cut through again. As we know in the past, while they're known to perform well at local level, at European election level, they often then fall short when it comes to general election, when it really comes to the crunch, just can't quite do it. They can't quite give up their traditional loyalty to Labour or the Tories.
Well, already all the parties are blitzing social media with videos and images, but this all comes as Twitter announces it's banning paid political advertising. Now, it's worth pointing out that Twitter is overall a very small player in that market. Facebook is the big fish, and Facebook, it seems, has no intention of turning down the cash and following Twitter in banning them. And I have to say, Robert, I'm not sure that they should ban political advertising, because what is political advertising? Is it just political parties? Is it pressure groups? Is it, for example, Momentum? Should they not be allowed to buy adverts? They're not a political party, but they're a group that acts in support of a party. You know, people have said that, for example, Jeremy Corbyn's success 2 years ago was largely built not on appearances in the media, but on the videos that were produced and spread online. And they were not spread through paid advertising. They were spread organically by people sharing them with their friends. That, you know, if you look, Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren in the United States are people who've built their campaigns on social media, on reaching out to people. I just wonder if banning advertising is necessarily the right response to this, if that maybe the responsibility lies with the voters a little bit. Don't believe everything you read, everything you see. Your vote is a precious thing, and before you cast it, you should apply some critical thought to the things that people are telling you. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't uninvent internet political advertising. And I just think that actually, like everything else, there's a responsibility on the consumer, on the buyer, as it were, to educate themselves a little bit better about the things that they're being told. Don't believe something that you see in an internet video just because a friend of yours has shared it.
I don't know how you really realistically police such things. I think such is the complex, elaborate, sophisticated, ruthless nature of political advertising now online. There would always be ways to slip under the radar anyway. So, as you say, then responsibility falls to the public, to voters, the people who are absorbing all this information, who are spouting all manner of things. Because of the world we now live in, people do seize hold of information that they want and are very quick then to angrily put it up on their Facebook, social media post. You know, the old echo chamber argument is unfortunately a very accurate one. There's so much anger being voiced on these things where people want to live with their certainties and don't want to broaden out to that. They don't want to hear the other side of the argument. Boris Johnson is a scumbag, full stop. You know, Jeremy Corbyn is an evil left-winger, full stop. You know, these people exist in these camps. They exist among their own social circle and don't hear anything else. I mean, I've seen at times on Facebook people posting stuff of, you know, showing here's a photograph of the corrupt BBC haven't broadcast today this very successful rally that Jeremy Corbyn spoke at, attended by thousands of people. Turns out the picture's a year old or something. This sort of nonsense goes on all the time. Now, so there is a responsibility on people to be more curious, to be a little bolder in trying to find out, you know, where real information lies rather than hysterical nonsense.
If only, listener, there were a trusted guide to hold your hand through the confusing weeks ahead. Now, hang on. You found them. Congratulations. And what better time, by the way, to tell all your friends about this amazing podcast to guide you through the election. That's right. They should all be subscribing to Brexit Cast. And this one as well, obviously. And why not join us indeed on social media, as evil as it may be. We are active on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at Party Games Pod. We'll leave it there for the moment. The campaign proper gets underway in the next few days, and we will doubtless be back next week to analyse the opening skirmishes. For the moment, though, thank you to Robert. Thanks to you for listening, and goodbye.